welcome to Crosscultural with Dr. Alfie. I'm your host, Dr. Alfie. Today, we have the opportunity to talk with a media consultant psychologist, a psychologist who identifies as Asian American and who really knows a lot about diverse populations and their mental health, as well as who knows a lot about Asian American culture, Asian culture, and its relationship and intersection with mental health. So stay with us. I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode with you and really looking forward to having you learn from our guest who consults on a show that many of you are very familiar with. So stay tuned. It is my honor to have Dr. Helen Hsu here on the podcast with us today. I'm on Couched in Color, and I'm really just excited to have a conversation about lots of things, but I think two things in particular. You would introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about whatever you'd like to share with us. I really would love for my audience to learn more about you and hear about your work.
Yes. Hi, I'm so thrilled to be here and have a chance to actually sort of meet. I'm Dr. Helen Hsu. I'm currently a staff psychologist at Stanford University, our counseling center on campus. I'm the past president of the Asian American Psychological Association. And to give you a sense of my interests, some of the other stuff I've done, I'm the current chair of the American Psychological Association Minority Fellowship Program, the Training Advisory Committee. So 100% our purpose is mentoring students of color to serve populations of color in psychology. And that's pretty much what I'm all about. I started out in hospice and grief work. And over about 20 years of my career, I started moving to serving younger and younger people because I really started to see the value of trying to do prevention.
Yes. Awesome. Awesome. So tell me a little bit about, I don't know that I've ever talked to anyone who started their career in hospice. Mm-hmm. What was the arc for you? Tell me what was important about hospice for you and just sort of where from hospice, if you still do that kind of work, where did it lead you? What was the path going from, and how did you get interested in that in particular?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's cultural a little bit, right? That a lot of Asian cultures really venerate like elders. I've always really kind of liked elders more than kids. Mm-hmm. I felt like all my friends were the child and family track. Mm-hmm. I was interested in adults. I loved working in geriatrics. Hospice was just really a huge learning experience for me. I realized this is one of the only universal experiences. Mm-hmm. But in Western psychology or Western culture, no one likes to talk about death. Mm-mm. Whereas a lot of our other cultures, like we talk to our ancestors all the time mm-hmm. and have a different relationship to death, but people mm-hmm. here really struggled with it. Mm-hmm. So I do we still do grief work at Stanford. Okay. A lot of people don't realize, even on a campus of young people, mm-hmm. some of the stats said like 20 to 25% are grieving at any time. So yeah, I see that as very much it's a really important part of our lifespan that like Western culture doesn't like talk about. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But then I started to see that for a lot of the adults I was working with, I'd be thinking, I wish somebody had talked to them when they were like 25, mm-hmm. 16, mm-hmm. 10. Mm-hmm. So it's wound up, shifting to a lot of younger work over the years.
So what would you say, would you say there's some really important lessons that you wish younger people knew about death and dying or grief or, I don't know, just the life course? Because we're all going to age, right? If we're fortunate, that's the gift, is you get to age and you get to be around. So Absolutely. What kinds of things do you think is important for young people to, what do you wish they knew at 16 and 25, about grief and that whole process?
Mm-hmm. For everyone, actually, I just wish, and again, some of our cultures have it and some don't. I wish it'd be that normalization that like, this is a thing that happens and it's okay to talk about it and that we grieve in different ways. Mm-hmm. Some of my favorite books that I'd use with people who are grieving, some of them are meant to be kids' books. Mm-hmm. They're still like really moving for adults, right? Mm-hmm. And at one of our clinics at one point, we finally set up the Dia de los Muertos altar. Mm-hmm. And it was really powerful for everybody, staff and clients, about how, this is a part of life. How do we appreciate what we're going through now and survive and get through this, and also like understand the connection that this is how the generations go. And just having tools like all the psychoeducation and mental health stigma work that you're always trying to do. I always tell people, like, don't let somebody tell you you're doing it wrong. Right? Like, right. You might be angry, you might be sad, you might be numb. Those are all normal.
Right. Oh, I really appreciate that because I didn't think we were going to go in this direction, but I
Mhm.
lost my mom. She passed when I was 8 months pregnant with my son, and my son's now 14. So my marker is always when people say, how long has your mom been gone? I think, how old is Miles? I'm like, oh yeah, she's been gone 14, right? And it was like 3 weeks. Hold on one second, because somebody's about to come in the door. She's going to start barking.
He's gonna start.
Morgan, can you do me a favor and take her with you? Thank you. I'm sorry.
Oh no.
Okay. Oh, thanks. I need to see. So I'm gonna go back a little bit. So, I didn't think we were gonna end up going in this direction, but when I lost my mother, that was a really rough time. So I lost her mother passed in August. 3 weeks later, my mother passed. Like I said, I was 8 months pregnant. And then later at the end of that year, my uncle, my father's youngest brother, passed. So it was like boom, boom, boom. And I love what you said about culture because in Black Southern culture, there's this saying that death comes in threes. I'm sure every culture has something. And that was the year that it came in threes. And lots of us handled it, all in my family, we all handled it really different ways. Because my mom was like, she was sort of the linchpin that held everybody together. And, I just remember one thing that was really important to me was I needed to be isolated. Like I needed to not have people in my space. And other people wanted to just commiserate and let's look through pictures. And I was just like, no, y'all just get away from me. Like, just leave me alone. Do you know what I mean? And so I love the idea of you creating space and you giving people permission to grieve in the way that they need to grieve because there is, and not stigmatizing grief. There is no way to grieve. And so what it makes me think of is you said some cultures have it and some cultures don't. Can you describe an example of where maybe in one Eastern culture, there's a way that people talk about death and dying and grief that differs slightly from how we're taught about it in Western culture?
Mm-hmm. I mean, even acknowledging it
Okay.
and how important. So I remember I had a Vietnamese American coworker that when his mother passed, I mean, he wore a black armband the whole entire year. And everybody knew to treat him with sensitivity and acknowledge what he'd lost.
Yes.
Whereas like at Stanford, a lot of my students who lose a parent, people are like, oh, that's too bad. And like a month later, 6 months later, like, okay, so you're getting back in the lab and and it's this feeling like, wait, is there no space for this?
Yes.
Right? Like it's not even sinking into me for maybe months and months or a year, like how permanent her absence is, and everyone else just wants to like move on, like we're okay.
Yes.
And so I actually do warn people that to expect people will say insensitive things sometimes, not because they're rude, but like we grieve in different ways. And some people don't know what it's like to grieve at all yet.
Yeah.
And others just don't get it that like maybe you want to look at pictures and cry for an hour, but like I just want to like burn some incense and like meditate peacefully, or something.
Yes. Oh, I really love the power of creating space to let the grief have its course, run its course, right? And I don't think it ever ends, right? Because I still think about my mom, and my son will be 14. It'll be in September, right? So I remember like September 21st, and I have these experiences, excuse me, where I'll be going through my day and not really thinking about anything, and then it'll like rush over me. It'll be a wave, and if I sit and think, I'm like, oh yeah, this was the day when I went and picked up, like I can remember the date when I went and picked up my 2-year-old because she had babysat for me so I could study for the EPPP. Do you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. And it comes in those kinds of ways. So I really love this idea of your Vietnamese client wearing that armband. I'm thinking I'm going to get me an armband and put it on because I don't think I ever really did that sort of public grieving process. And I think what you're speaking to is how we're often encouraged to do it in the United States. It's like, okay, you get this little bit of time, but then you need to get over it. Like we got other stuff to do. Let's get it moving.
Like at most workplaces, maybe 5 days bereavement leave, 10.
Ouch. Right. And it's not done that fast.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Right.
Ouch.
Whereas, like for example, at my aunt's house back in Taiwan, like, there was an altar, and in many homes, my in-laws have an altar, and you have ancestors' photos up, and it's like a regular thing in a fairly prominent part of the home, that you don't ever stop missing someone, but you also can draw on them, right? But I think in Western culture, there's often a like, oh, we don't want to talk about anything sad. So I always share how like I thought it was so touching. One of my Asian American students on campus joined the Latinx community center because they have a ceremony for Dia de los Muertos. And he was allowed to talk about the loss of a sibling there. And there wasn't like other spaces.
Wow, I love that. And I love the cross-cultural implications. And I love that there are ways in which, for me, that's always a thread. That even though we have different lived experience and different histories, there are these things that allow us to come together and draw us together. And I think I heard you say that your family is Taiwanese. Did I hear that right?
It's complicated.
Okay.
Taiwan is my home country. I'm an immigrant. I'm a therapist.
Okay.
But my family is from China, a little bit Mongolia. And I don't identify as Taiwanese because I want to recognize there's indigenous people in Taiwan.
Yes. Oh, I appreciate the context. I really do. That's helpful. And so what it speaks to me about is, are there ways in which you feel like your background and your lived experience and your family history come into and inform the work that you do? And I'm particularly interested in it from the perspective of the work that you do now at Stanford, because I assume you work with a lot of students, undergraduates and grad students.
Both.
Okay. Do you find that there are aspects of your background and experience? I think this is an obvious answer, but what are the ways in which you see it sort of coming into, you bring it into the work and allowing it to inform the work that you do? Because I know for me, as a Southern Black person, a lot of what ends up coming into the work is faith, right? Faith. I happen to be Catholic, so I'm not traditional, like most African Americans I know who are Protestant. But having the comfort with being able to talk about faith, I know a lot of that's because I'm Black and a lot of it's because I'm Southern. And so I'm wondering if there are ways in which you find your heritage, ethnicity, and background come into the work that you do with young people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you probably heard all the data about how like the younger population is more and more like mixed ethnically and culturally.
Yes.
They're much more like open and embracing about diversity, which I think is great.
Yes.
Now, problem is, like, we do all this work about mental health, like stigma busting and encouraging people to reach out for help. But then, can they help? Can they find someone that's like culturally responsive and actually knows how to help them? Right. One of the things I remind people when I do teach, I'm a lecturer as well, is, all of us educated here in the United States, we've been taught like, well, you're a minority. And I'm like, listen, you got to remember that we are the global majority.
That part.
Right. And so my colleague and friend, Dr. Lawanda Hill, and I started doing a workshop on decolonizing mental health at Stanford. Right. Like getting that like colonial mentality that you've got about like, I'm the weird one, to like, listen, in the world, this kind of collectivistic way of being is actually not the minority.
Right.
And so I think I work from a place of like, I think all the things that contribute to our mental health problems, but for a lot of people who are sort of visually identifiable ethnic minorities in the United States, right? The ways that like microaggressions play out in their daily lives, the experiences they have, that I'm very familiar with that I'm always trying to check my own biases. I think the number one complaint from Asian American clients who seek therapy in the US is that US therapists will be like, telling them that their family bonds are not right. Y'all are too enmeshed. Why are you doing that way? And they're promoting this like individualistic Western philosophy about normal and healthy. And it's like, yeah, that's not appropriate for certain groups, That's like a core value, right? Just like things like spirituality or traditional health practices. Like if you have a therapist that pathologizes that or doesn't understand that, like that's just not going to work.
Everything that you're saying, I think is so important. And I love this concept of decolonizing mental health, because we do have this mentality in the United States that there is sort of one way and there's one path, and the path to mental health is linear. Do you know what I mean? And you start you start unwell and you end up well. And I don't think we have this conceptual, and it's all brain, right? So
Yeah.
I get like, it just drives me nuts when we talk about, mental health is just brain science. That's part of it. But if you're not talking about, like you and your colleague, Dr. Hill, if you're not talking about these, how, as you and I know well, social determinants of health, if you're not talking about that stuff, you can fix and give people pills and do brain stuff and studies and look at genetics all day, but you're still sending people back into environments where they have to deal with society, right? They got to deal with the world around them. And so why not give people permission and encourage and support them taking care of their mental health and coping in ways that feel natural to them? Right? And so I guess what I wonder is, are there things that you can educate us about that you feel like are really important aspects? Now, let me say up front, I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I tell everybody there were 3 ethnic groups. It was black folks, white folks, and Filipinos. I didn't say Asian, it was Filipino, because that was because the Navy and a very large population of Filipino families. And so I know that Asian culture is super, 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 super diverse. What I'm wondering is, if you want to pick one, if you want to pick two, if you want to say sort of globally, these are the universal threads, are there things that you feel like it's important for people to know? Also thinking about Asian American young people themselves, are there things you feel like it's important for them to know and hear about how they need to take care of and attend to and pay attention to, I guess, their own mental health? I'm just curious.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough because, right, we come from like 30 different countries. I mean, maybe for a practitioner, that's one thing to remember is like, always remember to check, like, how do you self-identify, right? Do you consider yourself Asian American, or are you a more recent immigrant or international student? Or are you strictly like, I don't associate with Asian American as a group. I am, I strongly identify as Hmong or something. So yeah, where are they at? It'll give you a sense. And then there's Pacific Islanders that they're often like considered part of AAPIs, but not always. Like on my campus, our Native Hawaiians and Islanders prefer the Native American Community Center and feel closer to them. So, we got to ask people, like, where do you identify? What's important to you?
Yes.
And that's a great starting point. And I think maybe a real important point that sometimes our own people don't even know is we are like the most bimodal group, meaning we have the highest educated and some of the absolute lowest, some of the highest income levels and some of the absolute lowest poverty levels. Of course, when you stick those data points together, we look normal. Right? So then nobody really actually sees like what's going on, right? That, Asians and Asian Americans do still have mental health needs and face all kinds of challenges. And xenophobia, that like you could be a 6th generation American and people are acting like you don't belong here. But I think collectivism is a big thing, right? So that is the most common thing I hear from clients about being put down by being told that their family bonds are somehow too enmeshed, when like many other cultures, we are one of the most likely to have like multi-generational households, which is normal.
That's right.
And wonderful in many ways.
Healthy. That's right.
Often people are told like, oh, you don't have healthy boundaries. Now, boundaries are important.
Right.
But is that on a Western standard, or can you figure out what's an Asian American standard? Because for most of us, we don't want to live by like the cultural norms of like our parents.
Right.
It was maybe more hierarchical or patriarchal.
Right.
But we're not white Americans necessarily either. And what are our values?
Right. Oh, well, so all of that I personally find very helpful, and I know my audience will find helpful. And I think that one of the things that really stands out to me is you stressing asking people how they identify, right? Especially in a clinical setting, right? I think it's also important in developing friendships is maybe not diving in and be like, so where are you from? Or where's your family from? Where are your people from? What's your labels? Not necessarily that, but really allowing conversations to emerge so that you can hear and pick up clues, right? And then I always tell people, you have to educate yourself. Don't go in asking people to teach you everything there is to know, right? Because invariably you're going to get something wrong, but you're going to get it wrong anyway. But I think it's just much better if we approach like relationships and friendships and even that therapeutic, like in the clinical encounter, approach that with I hate to say open mind because that's so cliche, but really more approach it with a willingness to learn, right? A willingness to be corrected, a willingness to be wrong, a willingness to say the wrong thing, apologize sincerely, and then keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that sort of makes me think about, and I hope it's okay. You told me it's not okay to talk about this. The television show
Mm-hmm.
that you had an opportunity to work on. And the reason it makes me think of it is because there's so many different opinions about how do we engage in conversations around sensitive topics in the area of mental health. And so if you wouldn't mind telling our audience a little bit about the show that you worked on, most of them probably will know, but and that you were a part of it. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your involvement with the show? And you had some really, I thought, interesting thoughts and opinions that you shared with me when I was doing background to get prepared that I feel like are important for us to hear about mental health in young people. So if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're in this too, right? Like, how do you use modern media to actually educate people about things that are really important?
Yes.
So the funny thing about being invited to consult as one of the psychological consultants for 13 Reasons Why by Netflix, it's funny because I actually watch almost zero TV.
Right.
And that's been for decades,
Okay.
It's one of the ways I protect my mental space, but clinical work. But when they explained that this book that I'd never heard of has been popular with young people, translated all around the world for years, I was like, oh, because my thing is if young people really are into something, it's on the adults to listen and ask why.
Yes.
Right. And so a lot of the controversy and backlash, and I don't think they did everything perfectly, but it is a show. It's not going to encompass everything.
Yeah.
But I was really aghast how many adults were like, this book should have never been written. This show should have never been made. And I'm like, I've been sitting with kids for 2 decades, and you think they don't know this? You think they haven't experienced this? Right? This is what contributes to kids not telling parents things and getting to that dangerous place. I think it was it season 2 or 3 that there's like a 2-minute scene, like literally only 2 minutes, where Zach, who's like the hunky Asian jock on the show, but there's a 2-minute scene with his mom, and it just, to me, it was like, how many times have I seen this in my work, where he basically says to his mom, well, what if I felt like Hannah did? And she is the young woman who died by suicide in the first session. And he's like, well, what if I've ever felt that way? Because I have. And his mom, who is Chinese, is like, don't say that. It's putting ideas. She put ideas in your head. You're fine. And it's such a painful scene because you see that she's scared, right? I mean, she's not trying to shut him down, but then you see that like he's in pain and she just can't, right? Like neither of them have the tools. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how often do we see that with all our kids, but especially our ethnic minority? And I feel like especially Asian Americans, like they don't have that same kind of like maybe mental health psychoeducation, know what to do, where to go. But it creates silences that I think are dangerous.
Oh. Wow. I have to sit with that for a second. I'm sorry. Because it's so true that not all, but for so many of our parents who are parents of color, that is the reaction, right? I can vividly remember sitting with families where it was very similar, where the kids said, well, what if I decided I don't want to be here anymore? And that's the parents like flying to it. What do you mean? We don't do that, And I've had parents say, that black people are, insert ethnic group. We don't do that. That's white people stuff. And you just kind of have to take them and say, oh, well, wait a minute. That's not, it doesn't discriminate. It impacts all of us. And so just as you said, I like the way that you framed what the mom's reaction was, right? It was fear. She was scared.
Yeah.
She didn't know what to do. And so I think being able to, in some ways, approach it from that perspective that maybe people just don't know. And I like to say, like you shared psychoeducation, I like to describe it as bringing stuff into people's awareness, right? They're just not aware that these things, I think, sometimes are out there. Or maybe they have a little bit of awareness, but they don't know what to do with it. So just like with the characters that you described with Zach and his mom, she didn't know what to do with that, right? So it's just like, well, let's just make it disappear because I don't know what to do with it. And so I think I like the way that you frame it, that we can't pretend that these things don't exist in kids' lives.
Yeah.
And the best thing that we could do, I think, is to, one, acknowledge, and then two, try to figure out what can we do to engage young people, to understand stuff a little better, understand them a little better. So with that said, I think I'm curious as we wind down a little bit, do you have any thoughts for parents, right? Because I get this question a lot, and I have my opinion, but I want to hear the expert because you worked on the show. Do you have any thoughts for ways that parents, let's think about younger teens, let's make it real specific, younger teen, maybe under 15, ways in which parents can engage in these kinds of conversations with their kids before it turns to what Zach went through with his mom in that scene? What can parents do? How do they check in? How do they find out what's going on? What would you say?
Mm-hmm. I mean, absolutely bringing it up regularly in little ways, right? Like, hey, if you have something going on, like we could talk about it.
Okay.
I think one of the most important things that a parent can let somebody know is, if I don't know, I'll find out.
Okay.
Yeah. And also, even if I'm mad at you, I'll help you. Right? Like, even because if you have to tell me something really scary, like you snuck out and something bad happened, I'm going to help you, or, right? Because I think this is the stuff that makes kids afraid. Yes. And so, and in certain communities, we have more hierarchy, and Asian Americans are like that too. Like, parents are not your friends. They don't do chit chat. So then that means when you need to have this conversation, it's so huge and overwhelming and scary, and you don't know how to do it.
Yes.
But if parents can just keep dropping these openings to be like, I'm going to be open with you about, I can identify my feelings, I can seek help. If something comes up with you, even if I am angry, even if I'm disappointed, I will help you, and I will help you find answers. Like, one parent came to me who's an immigrant from the Philippines, and was like, she's like, I don't really get it. My kid's saying they want to see a therapist.
What is that about? Right.
Like, I don't know, but I'm willing to, if she thinks it'll help her. And I was like, okay, we can work with that. Right?
Yes.
It's a start.
Yes.
It's a start. That there can be that kind of exchange, instead of the ways that sometimes, just because a parent's like scared or they don't understand, but they wind up shutting things down. And then later, right, you work with parents too. Then I get parents like, I don't understand. Like, how could they not tell me these really important things? It's like, because they're like scared of you. Or
And you're not the most open person in the world. And I've said with you in clinic, like, I'm thinking of families that I've worked with over the years. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of understand why they don't say anything to you. I don't want to say anything. I'm scared, so I get it. So that, I feel like the thing that I'm going to take with me, I'm probably going to put it in the title of the episode, is even if I'm mad at you, I will still help you. That was like, that's eye-opening for me to be able to say, because what you're doing, I think, on multiple levels. Now, this, we're going to get into like psychology land, but like geek out on psych, but it is modeling for the kid that you can hold more than one feeling at once, right? I can be angry and still love you and still want to be supportive of you. Do you know what I mean? Like, me being angry doesn't mean I don't care about you anymore. And I feel like that's really important modeling for kids. And like you said, it just keeps the lines of communication open all the time. So that's awesome. So thank you so much for that. So the final thing that I like to do is ask you to reflect. It's just a quick little reflection. I have these things called affirmators that I tell everybody about. And affirmators are sort of like a fun way to do affirmations. And so for the affirmator, I'm going to pick one and I'm just going to read it real quick. And then I would ask you if you have any thoughts to reflect on it for me, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right. So mine, let me make sure I got here we go. All right. So mine is, the one I picked is risks. I take big risks and leap into the unknown with fearless abandon, knowing that the best surprises and richest experiences come from bold choices. Worst case scenario, the unknown is filled with spiders and they swarm me and eat me and decorate their spider cave with my bone. But what are the chances? So risk. Do you have any thoughts?
I love it, because I'm always telling people we only grow if we keep pushing our comfort zone, and as a child of immigrants, right, my family generations, it's about taking leaps.
Yes.
scary ones, and not everything worked out exactly right, but
Yes.
in the long run, yeah. And that like spider thing makes me laugh, because I tell clients all the times when their anxious mind is going, what if this, what if that?
Yeah.
I'm like, you gotta have a little humor about the absurdity of where our anxiety goes. Like, when I start getting that, I mean, I've learned to be like, really? Like, how like is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Well, Dr. Hsu, thank you so much for your time. I am just so grateful. And I know that the clients that you work with out there at Stanford and in California, and the consulting that you've done on television, has been helpful to so many people. I certainly have appreciated the wisdom I've gained from you today. And I will keep you posted on when this goes up and everything, so you'll know in advance. I usually try to tell you a week in advance, and it's probably going to take about a month for us to get through some more episodes. But thank you so much, and I'm wishing you like,
Oh, my pleasure.
yes, all good stuff, and be safe out there. Staying in place and everything. And I've just quickly. There you have it. Thanks for joining us on this episode. It was my treat to have Dr. Helen Hsu, a staff psychologist at Stanford University and a consultant, as you heard, on the Netflix show 13 Reasons Why. It really was insightful for me to gain knowledge from her about some of the differences between Eastern approaches to grief and dying. I wasn't expecting to go in that direction, but I'm so glad that we did. And as you heard me share my own experiences with grief and loss with my mother. And it was just validating to hear a lot of what she shared about how we grieve. And it was very validating and encouraging to hear about her passion for working with diverse populations, because that's what we're all about here. So we hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Of course, I can't leave without asking you to go subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up. Give us a comment if you would like on our YouTube channel. And then drop on over, if you can, to any place you get your podcast fix. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever you go to get that podcast fix. Follow us on Couched in Color. You see we have new branding that we're super excited about. Zing Social Media helped us out with that, and we just are really grateful to them. And then finally, what I want to say to you is what I always share. And before I do that, I want to remind you, go follow us on our Instagram page. Go follow us on Twitter. And you can find me at dralfie.com. So in closing, what I will say is what I always say to end the show, and that is that I'm wishing you lots of love, lots of light, and hoping that it is always informed by good, culturally relevant science. Take care.